So thank you all. And I would like to now introduce Dr. Danielle Cote, who is the Assistant Professor of Material Science and Engineering.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's interesting group work. And I found that, with my research group, we're having similar challenges. I think that most people are doing. So I'm going to highlight today some of the lessons learned that we have from our research during quarantine and now during restricted lab access. So my research group right now consists of everybody from first year, second year undergraduates through PhDs, postdoc, research professor. So we kind of spread the gamut of what we have. And what we found, and the biggest takeaway that we seem to get out of this has been structure. This group needs structure. And I guess I would call it more of a scaffolding where, we create that structure and kind of let them fill in the spaces as they need it. So prior to quarantine, this group shared an office. Most of them, they weren't all squished in an office, but most of them shared an office space. They work collaboratively. All of our research efforts are incredibly collaborative. So they're used to being together and working together all the time. And quarantine comes and it was a real shock, as it was for many people. They, suddenly didn't have their colleagues, they didn't have their friends, they weren't physically with each other. And we found early on that we had to kind of create this scaffolding for them. So what we did is we actually created, and you can kind of see here in the schedule, we had almost daily meetings initially, and they were over Zoom, and it sounded like overkill. And I kind of regretted doing it, after the first few. I was like, oh goodness, this is every day. But we found it was very important for the students to stay engaged. They really needed that, not just for the technical aspect. In fact, technically, they would have been fine with weekly meetings doing this on their own, but they needed it. They needed it personally. I have a few quotes here that I share from my students. They all admitted quarantine was very isolating, and they really relied on these group meetings. So I think that was something that we did, and that we would definitely continue to do. Hopefully we don't have to revert back to that, but if we do, it's something that we definitely found was very useful. We also, like other groups, kind of focused on housekeeping. We created a web presence. We all worked with research librarians at the university and worked, on how to curate our web presence. So, we're very external facing if we want to be. So a lot of them worked on their personal profiles as well as our group website. We created a lab logo. Of course, deeper literature searches. We did create a journal club, which we found was really useful too. So we would take turns finding, journal papers. Initially, it was great because I got to go through that folder on my desktop of read later papers and got through that. So we read one of those. We do 1 or 2 papers a week, and have discussion questions on it, and different students would lead each week. And we found all of us actually got some really good insights out of that, and led us to some interesting research areas that we certainly wouldn't have had time for prior. I also do show this picture of popcorn. So Harry and David online, you purchased their famous Moose Munch popcorn. Initially, early on during quarantine, I sent some to each of my students, and some of them were living at home with their parents, and some of them were by themselves. And all of them just found that was surprising. But a little gesture like that actually went a long way, because they'd be sharing their favorite flavors, and they'd be talking about, they'd be working together, as they're eating it. And I think something small like that, that was a small investment, was really powerful for them. And also, since then, I found Insomnia Cookies is local and in Worcester, and they also provide a similar service. So if you want to support local, we have good reviews on those. So that's what we kind of switched to when they need a little pick-me-up. That's something that we did. Also, my group has been really good at finding the silver lining in things. So one silver lining they found was, when they're on campus and not a lot of other students are, all of our sensitive equipment works really well. In fact, I got just this morning, I got a message from one of my students, hey, check out how accurate this nano-indenter data is, because nobody's around, we're not getting those vibrations. So they've been really good at finding those silver linings for us. Next slide, please. So this is our new lab space. So this is it's a very unassuming building that WPI purchased on Sagamore Road. It's on the other side of the Salisbury Estates, on the other side of campus. And inside, this unassuming facade opens up to 33,000 square feet of lab space. It is really exciting. So there's 3 labs that are occupied now, and more space to be finished. And some of it right now is being moved into as we speak. So it's really exciting. It's been a great space. And what the takeaway here was, and I watched this go up mostly during quarantine, which was very impressive, even after construction projects stopped for a while, we were able to get back at it, and this renovation has just been amazing and beautiful. And it really took a village. I think about, everyone who helped make this happen and to turn this around. This would have been a difficult task if you saw the before. I walked into the building before the renovations and it was nothing like what it looks like now. It would have taken a village, but then to do it during quarantine is impressive. Between everybody, the architects, the construction workers, facilities people on WPI's end did a lot, subcontractors, everybody, they really made it happen. And it's been a really exciting space, and we're really excited to fill it. And hopefully everyone can kind of take a walk over there one of these days. It's really, really interesting, and lots of good space. And besides lab space, there's also common spaces. There's some small conference rooms, offices. It'll be a great collaboration space. So last slide, please. So when Wally asked me to do this, he asked if I would discuss the research that we've been doing and also the new lab space, the Sagamore lab space, and added, but how do you manage to do it with little ones? Well, I'm sure this picture looks familiar to many people. This is staged, but this is truly how days often begin, right? This is what happens. So this is it, Wally. This is what you're not seeing when we're having these conversations. And often blindly, this is how I get through, right? Blindly. If there's ever erroneous emails sent or some major typos, I'm blaming baby Bennett. These guys they make things a challenge. But what really got me thinking is how I'm going to talk, meaningful about this. And I guess reflecting in this case is how, remember when we actually used to have a village to raise these kids, to have our family was all part of this great support system of this great village, family and friends and teachers and babysitters, and not just for family, for dog walkers, house cleaners, we had everything. And now we've reduced this village into this tiny little pod, if we're lucky enough to have a pod. So that's been a big jump, and I think that's a big adjustment for everybody. Personally, my pod now, we're lucky to have a pod. It's my husband and me and the kids, and we still have our nanny, and we have our immediate family and one family of friends, and that's it. And it's incredible how much we've lost for support, but we still managed to get through. And we have the iPad, and I have to say, the iPad has been a huge part of our pod, as much as I don't want to admit it. It's honest. In fact, at the beginning of quarantine, when we weren't seeing anybody, it was just the four of us at home, our daughter became fascinated with British cartoon shows like Peppa Pig, for all you parents out there. There's several now that she's been watching, and she watched them so much because we just needed to work, right? She was watching them, and now she's developed a small British accent, and it didn't even dawn on me that was a British accent. I just thought it was how she spoke, until other people have said, why does your daughter speak with an accent? So we admitted it. She has a British accent as a result of this. Her vocabulary includes words like holiday and pram and ice lolly. A few months ago, she came into the room and asked where her torch was. I did a quick Google search, and it turns out torch means flashlight. So she was just looking for her flashlight. But that's the reality. It's not something I'm proud of for sure, but it's something that happens. And I've heard this story. I've heard similar stories between so many other parents. And I think everyone is doing, the best we can. And I'm happy to be able to talk about it with everybody. And we're just trying to normalize it. I think that's something we can do.